Okay, Jesse, so I'm excited to speak with you about Hell Hath No Fury. But before I start asking you questions for readers and listeners and viewers who have not, heard of this movie, can you kind of give like a short, from the director's point of view, a short just synopsis and talk about what this movie is from your point of view?
Certainly, certainly. So we're in the late stages of World War II, 1944 August. The Allied invasion has happened in France, and we find ourselves, the Germans on the run, leaving France rapidly, headed back to Germany. We find ourselves in a cemetery in southern France with a supposed collaborator, a French girl who's had a head shaved and she's been stripped and has had a swastika put on her forehead, and several US troops. She's taken them there under the auspices to save her, to get her away from being lynched or stomped or beaten by the retribution crowd, under the promise that there's gold hidden in a grave at this graveyard. What ensues is far more complex than anyone had expected. We have a group of French resistance who are also headed towards the graveyard, who know about our girl Marie, and have their minds set on the gold and various different other things. And then we also learn that there's a group of 10 or 15 renegade SS soldiers who are also headed back from their retreat to this cemetery for the same reason, the gold and Marie. We're not quite sure which and which order. And as the film plays out, we learn a little bit more about each of the four sort of elements in the film and what their dog in the fight is and why they're headed to that graveyard, and what's so important about Marie, the hidden gold, and who's going to get it, and whether they get it or not. And if I tell any more, I'll give it away, but it's not what you expect. It's not the classic World War II film where the Allies wear the white hat and the Nazis wear the black hat. There's certainly no question mark about the Nazis being bad guys. That's undeniable, and I'm not any kind of strange apology. But the complexities in this are more based around human character and what goes on inside our hearts under pressure and in the melting pot of combat, and what it does to men and women and people. And I found an extraordinarily compelling story. It was pitched to me. I put a huge call out during COVID for films that could be shot with minimal cast in minimal locations. And I probably got about 45 scripts back, read all of them. And this was one that we just kept using as the guiding, the litmus test. Is it better than Hell Hath No Fury? At each script that we read, my assistants and my manager, and we kept coming back to, and eventually said, well, this is the one that we have to make. It's just, it's the one that we use as the guide, the guide benchmark. It's, there are elements of it of a spaghetti western that really appealed to me. I have a deep love for those pictures. I grew up watching the Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns. I found their sort of operatic, baroque, almost very European sensibilities painted on this background that I grew up loving, the Western. And I like that. I like films that are told by familiar stories told in an unfamiliar way. And that was something that truly appealed about the script. You expect that what it's going to be about. And it's funny reading the comments under the trailer when it was posted. It's a massive sort of response when it went out, but how wrong, how off course and misguided so many of them are, thinking that it's a classic, one of the more recent classic World War II movies. There are fantastic World War II movies made in the 60s and 70s when you still had a lot of these guys around that were able to tell the filmmakers and put a mark. But we've come into this era now, post Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, where people just want to make these homage movies to those two sources, and there was so much more going on, so much more interesting stuff happening, and so many more tales of heroism and the grace that the human character is forced to achieve under pressure, which is something that I have a deep fascination with. So I think this is something rather interesting for filmmakers, and that's hardly a quick log line. I apologize, but it does.
Oh, no, you have
about the film and why it appealed to me.
Yeah, whatever you have to say is a lot more interesting than what I have to say. I'm just here to prompt you. So thanks for the detailed answer. I wanted to ask then, going off of that, obviously it was pitched to you, you got this, it was already written. But as a director, did you make any adjustments to the original script that was pitched to you? Because there's so many levels to this film, as you have said. It's like, okay, there's this going on, there's this, oh, and then you have these people coming back to the cemetery. Was this all in the script initially, or is this something that you added certain levels, whether it be to the main characters or just the storyline in general?
Whenever I take on a project, I put an enormous amount of myself into it. I never take a writing credit unless I'm forced to. But I think any director worth his, I don't know. I rephrase that because there may be perfect scripts out there which you don't need to. I know, there's interviews with John Huston when he took the script to Maltese Falcon, and they said they pretty much shot exactly what was on the page. There was no need to, and you hear these stories once in a while. This script was in French when I got it. It was translated by Google Docs to English. Romain Serret did a wonderful job of laying out the broad strokes of what this story became. I brought on Catherine McEwen, who's a writer that I work with a lot. She writes really strong female characters. She understands the way the female mind works. And it's extraordinarily important. I've worked with her on 5 films. I bring her in. I say, look, we need more strength. This was written by a guy. The guy characters are great, but the girls are all a little bit shallow. Get in there, do something, make something powerful of this. It's very, very important. I was raised by women. I had a single mother, and all the sort of powerful people in my family were matriarchs and women. And my grandmother had been in World War II. In 41 to 43, she was a member of the ATS, which was the land army. And it was partly her stories that really triggered an interest in this script, because there were so many unsung heroes of World War II who were women who did things that were unbelievable. But for some reason, as a nation, we fixate on the GI Joe with the cigar and the Tommy gun as being the hero, and make no bones about it, those guys were heroes, and there were a tremendous amount of heroic soldiers. But there were also these women that did things that were amazing. And then they, at the end of the war, they went back to civilian life, and they didn't, rush around trying to get medals or talk about their life. They went back and they went and had families and quietly rehabilitated and put themselves back into society after living, these sort of incredible adventures, absolutely hair-raising, blood-curdling things that they did, with the SOE and the OSS, and behind enemy lines, absolutely risking their life in situations that even reading about them nowadays, your heart's in your throat reading about what they did, And so I felt I needed to address that in some way with this. And so Catherine came on board and did an awful lot of work with the Marie character, really just fleshing her out. There were some other elements that were a little bit fantastical, which I toned down and then reached very deep into it, realistically what was going on. The SS group in this, the 12th SS, were actually, it made sense that they would be there. They were making, they were retreating at that time, and for a group of them to break away would make sense. The soldiers and why they're there, and what's gone in their story before that has that they had worked their way up from Italy through Sicily, which was some of the most intense, worst combat that the Americans saw. I mean, it was defeat after defeat after defeat until they finally broke through the Axis lines and were able to work their way up through what was just fighting every day up through Italy, and finally by the time they got to southern France, it had cooled down a bit. But these guys were shells of their former self, shadows, and that kind of combat, that kind of sustained stress level will take a man with morals and turn him into something else. It will make them into a combat machine that it takes a long time to come back to being a human being again after being in that kind of combat. And I wanted to reflect that in these Americans. It's all too easy. They say the victors write the history books. It's all too easy to paint Allied troops as being, these sort of savior types, and everyone else as being, a bad guy who's twisting his mustache. The truth is, in combat, everyone's in that melting pot together, and there's an incredible heroic behavior from all sides, but on the other side of that coin, there's deplorable savage behavior by people on all sides. It makes the very best of humanity, and it also shows the very worst. And I wanted to reflect that because, you know, we forget that, and it's all too easy to have this misinterpretation of history that you know, that was one side that was so profoundly wonderful and the others were profoundly bad, you know, which isn't true, and it just isn't. You know, if you read history or you're a student of history of any type, you realize that. So that was very important to me. So there's a little bit of that went on with the script. It had been, as I say, a little bit more comic booky and a little bit more sort of childlike, and we tried to sort of change that a bit, but it really, the bare bones were there in the script that was submitted. But the big thing that he did was fantastic, which is one of those sort of points that they always tell people not to do, is he submitted it with 4 or 5 comic book sketches of scenes in the film, which normally I would say don't do that. It doesn't help. You know, it's all about the script itself. Those 90 pages are all I care about. But in this particular case, the financier didn't speak English and didn't really want to read the whole script. And he looked at those comic book pages and said, "This sounds fantastic." And so in that rare occasion, because of COVID and because of all these things coming together, it became a very quick finance. And, you know, the other thing was, I'd gone to see him during COVID and we were talking. He said, "If you can find me a film I can make where I can own a World War II Jeep, I'll buy one and I keep it after the movie. That would be fantastic." And and I said, "Actually, I have a World War II script, which is wonderful." And I think it was more the World War II Jeep that he got to keep that got the film financed as much as anything. It's strange, these things that happen, you know, and ultimately it will possibly be the best film that I've directed to date. It's the one I'm most proud of, and certainly the performances, the performance that Nina gives is, for me, right up there with anything that I've seen, you know, let alone anything I've done. So I say that without too much sort of blowing of my own horn, because it was Nina's performance that did it. It's someone else, and she just did such a magnificent job of capturing this very complex person at a very complex moment. You know, she's a double agent who has, you know, obviously had to sleep with the enemy to get information across to help her cause, and then has found herself feeling feelings for that person, which I don't think is completely out of the question. This is, you know, the human mind is a delicate thing. You know, you can only tell it to do so much, and you know, and in the light of all the other people that are around her at the time, this is the one person that offers her any kind of generosity, any kind of warmth, and it's a very difficult time for her. And she has to decide, you know, what she's going to do about that. Is she's going to stick to her guns, which is, you know, country and honor and dignity, or is she going to, you know, be swept away by the guy that's offering her a chance to get away and, you know, live happily for the rest of their life in some, you know, wonderful resort somewhere with plenty of money. So it becomes there's a lot of complex things to think about. I love it when a character is driven by all of these sort of complexities below the surface, where the audience is watching not really knowing what they're going to do next, but when it happens, it makes sense.
So I love that you focus so much on the conflict inside these characters. And you've talked about Nina multiple times. Is her character's name Marie?
Marie, yeah.
So when she, towards the beginning of the film, when she initially gets her head shaved, like you had mentioned, prior to that, she had hair. So I was curious if she was actually getting, like, if she had her natural hair shaved in that scene, or if she had already had it shaved and you guys kind of went with that.
When I cast for this movie, I put the casting call out, and everyone wanted to play the part because the script was very, very good by the time it had been worked on and finished. Everyone wanted it. We had an incredible list of people who were submitting and eager to do it for the money that was being offered. But we needed to shave the head. And this is not a shaved head that looks attractive. You know, this is a shaved head that looked sheared. It has little bald spots in it and tufts of hair here. You're not going to any Hollywood parties. You're not going out, well, you have this hair. It's deplorable. It was shaved to humiliate these women. And so the list suddenly got very short of people that were actually willing to play the part from the initial one. You know, agents calling saying, "Can't we put a bald wig on and make it work?" You can't wear a bald wig. It's not doing honor to the character and the people. You know, we were shooting in chronological order, so it worked that we would do these scenes ahead where she had hair, and then we do the, you know, the shearing scene and the retribution scene, and it would happen in chronological order, and the rest of the film actually shot in chronological order as well. We bubbled, and the characters were able to get very much into, you know, there was no internet or cell phone where we were filming, so, and we all stayed at one big house there, a ranch house, and then the rest of the crew had various other buildings around where we were. Because of COVID, what would have normally been a, you know, sort of rather uncomfortable situation became an incredible sort of family unit that really worked well, and everyone almost played as if we were in the 1940s. You know, it was one of those magical experiences that came out of a very tough one the nation was facing, you know, world was facing. You know, so yes, it was an incredible task finding that actress to play that role. And we saw a few. We were cast, and we had an actress from Russia who is a multiple award-winning actress who was going to play it, and she wasn't able to get out of Russia because of, you know, at that time it was all locked up, and we were waiting, and we cast all the other actors, and I had to do the read-through. And we said everyone around the table, and I called Nina, who's an actress that I knew, and she came and did the read-through, and she was stunning and breathtaking in the read-through. And each of the actors, 6 actors that came to took me aside afterwards independently, not knowing that they were doing it, and basically said, "You have to hire her. She is incredible. This is the movie." People were moved in the read-through to tears at the end. I'm not going to give away too much about this movie, but it has a very emotional ending to the film. And Dominic, who's been my friend for a long time, he's an real ex-Foreign Legion mercenary, and sort of a rather scary fellow. He's a little bit like Charles Bronson. Took me aside, and he put a finger in my chest. He said, "You're a fucking idiot if you don't hire her," and then walked off. That's a lot of emotion from Dominic, and that's when you don't disagree too quickly with him. You know, you certainly pause to thought when someone like that talks to you that way. And so I went to the finances and said, I think we're making a big mistake if we wait any longer. And as it was, she never got out of Russia, so it was a huge, it was, right. We would not have made the movie had we waited for it, put it that way. We'd have lost the rest of the cast, because Daniel had to do Matrix, so he was leaving. Mm-hmm. I think a week after we wrapped, 4 or 5 days after we wrapped, he was going and gone and had to take COVID tests and things like that. So at the time, he wouldn't have been able to finish the movie. So we had this window, and it was rapidly closing, and Nina was there. And I'm just so happy we made that choice, because she's brilliant in the picture. Still, when I watch it, it's still moving the end for me, which is very rare of my own films. I can't stand them. Once I've locked picture and locked sound, I don't want to see it maybe for another year or two, because it's like the scene of a crime. It's all you see are all the things you could do differently. But with this film, it was because of the performances that I was wound into it. It was really wonderful,
So you've talked a lot about where you shot, and or not where you shot, but you talked about the shooting and that you were in the pandemic and you had a lot of restrictions. You guys kind of had this like family feel because you guys all had to work together in such a small location. But where did you actually film the movie?
We actually shot the film at an undisclosed location.
Understood.
Needless to say, it was strictly bubbled at the time. No one could come and go. Once you checked in, it was a 12-day shoot. Once you checked in at the beginning of that shoot, crew and cast, that was it for you. You were there. There were no visitors, and it was shot in chronological order. So everyone allowed characters to develop, and traits changed, and cuts and bruises. And believe me, all of the cast got cut and bruised. It was the most rigorous physical shoot that I think I've ever been on with regard to cut. I've done shoots where the stuntmen were thrown around more, and there's more things like Cutthroat Island and some of these bigger Lincoln and things like that, bigger movies where we've had stunt guys up to their noses in mud and things like that. But for the cast to actually be involved in it on a daily basis, this was the most rigorous and toughest. The temperatures were crazy. The air was constantly filled with a dust and a smoke because of the wildfires that were going on, and it was really, really a brutal shoot for everyone. And I think what that does is it galvanizes you into a kind of team spirit where everyone just sort of threads together and wants to, I don't know, it was a magical one. It was one of those ones you try and replicate every film you're on. And sometimes you do, sometimes it's just not possible, you know. The film I did immediately afterwards, for example, the film was shot so out of chronological order with actors coming in that we had to shoot out in 2 days that were, you know, that character was placed throughout the whole movie, and which is fine and it's good. And that's how you make films. And you know, but this one was beautiful in the respect that it was almost like a stage play that was taking place over those 12 days. So I'm very excited to hear what people think of the performances. I feel that they're some, you know, the very best that I've pulled off, but some of the very best I love watching as well.
So you're obviously very versed in this little bubble of history, if not history in general. And you had mentioned your grandma was, you know, in the war. I want to know how much of this information you had prior and how deep your research had to go once you read the script.
Well, that's a terrific question. I'm very, very interested in the Second World War. I don't know if you've looked at any of my other pictures. One of my other ones was set in 1954 in Indochina, a Savage Dog, where we had obviously all of the guys that had joined the Foreign Legion to get away from, that were in Indochina. And in 54, when the French lost and were kicked out, all these guys were like, oh shit, where do we go? We can't go back to France. We can't go back to Romania. And so I love that particular period in history. That it fascinates me, and I find it very compelling and very dramatic. And this is the best way. This is the best background to make movies against. I find it. You have larger than life people, you have larger than life situations, and stress and drama and real life cause people bigger than life characters to emerge, and so that it's always fascinated me. And I have a large collection of props and things that I initially bought to sort of inspire me while I was writing, but you realize before long you've got boxes and boxes of this stuff, newspapers and papers and uniforms and helmets and things like that you sort of like way too much, really. It doesn't make sense. So making this movie, a lot of that came from my personal store, because we didn't have a vast amount of cash, and then friends who were also into that usually I wouldn't be able to afford because of the pandemic. They came on board and said, no, we can help. We've got, we'll supply, the military vehicles, the period vehicles, the motorcycles, the, uniforms, all that kind of stuff. So on top of my rudimentary knowledge, it also did take an immense amount of research. It's very interesting doing a period piece, and it's part of the exciting thing of doing it. You say, okay, these two characters are here on a romantic picnic. They're going out for a picnic, for example. But they can't have white bread sandwiches. White bread wasn't there. They couldn't have jelly inside their sandwiches because there was no jelly at the time, because there was sugar rations and there was fruit rations. They would not have candy afterwards because candy was an anathema at that time. It did not exist. They might have sugared plums because that was all you had in France at that point. That was what they used as candy, sugared plums. And so even a picnic scene, the moment you scratch the historical accuracy of that scene, you suddenly realize, oh my God, they didn't have this, that, or that. She wouldn't have had stockings because stockings at the time were very difficult to lay hands on. Silk was difficult. My grandmother told me stories of going to dances where they took a marker pen and drew the line down the back of their leg to make it look like they had stockings on, because silk was such a commodity. It was being used for parachutes and things like that. So, and various different parts of the uniform. So, once you start peeling it back, you realize you can't. And for me, one of the most frustrating things watching the lesser World War II movies, there's a big rash of them that came out, and we looked at them and they were awful. They were deplorable movies. And we said, all right, so that's the bar that we can't go anywhere near. Let's keep watching the higher quality ones because that's what we want to be like. But you watch those ones, it's extraordinarily frustrating because of the mistakes they make. They don't do enough research. And that's sort of the fun of watching a period piece, is seeing how much research the filmmakers have done. So we did a lot on this one. It went really, really quite deep, One of the most exciting and rewarding moments was while I was doing the research for the title sequence, and we were looking for black and white footage of the actual sharing and retribution that took place with these poor French girls. Some of them may have been collaborators, but then the level of collaboration is up to debate, I must say. So I will say the poor French girls. Was that we found a black and white footage from a village in northern France of a girl who had her head shaved, but not only had she had the head shaved, she'd had her clothing removed, so her slip was underneath in the same way that Marie was, but she'd also had a lipstick swastika painted on her forehead. And at that moment, I realized that there was something special about the movie. We had a lot of luck through the whole thing, and finding a piece of stock footage that mirrored our footage that we'd already shot was pretty amazing, and we were all very excited about that. And so that's actually in the title sequence to the film, you know.
That's incredible. I really have a lot of respect for how far you go to avoid anachronisms. Like even in just like you said, a picnic scene, like when you talk about jelly and candy, that blew my mind. Was there like one specific thing that you remember learning when you're going through these anachronisms that really specifically blew your mind? Like, oh wow, this was not like that then, or was this just so many that you got used to that, like learning those new things?
I think it was there was an awful lot there. There was an awful lot. I mean, but on every level on this one, you know, even the guns that these guys used, the fact that two of the GIs are carrying German weapons. He carries a little Walther pistol. That's the one that shows up in the trailer. And this was things, you know, the soldiers would have taken those, but not before a certain date in the war. That sort of thing didn't happen until about 43, 44, as they came on German, you know, and as they started taking over and taking prisoners and beating back these guys hand to hand. So, and the gun that Tim Murphy's character Jerry carries, the MP44, that was not made until that wasn't fielded until 1944. So it's the same gun that Brad Pitt has. It's a, you know, they would often take these off captured soldiers or trade them amongst each other, you know, and use them in the same way that in Vietnam you see some pictures of the special forces guys with AK-47s. It was almost a badge of showing what you'd been through and where you'd been, but also it was a cool factor as well. You know, they were not immune to that sort of thing, that sort of showing off. And so you just have to, I just had to be very careful that nothing we had was from after August 44, which is when the movie was set. One of the most amazing thing was right at the last minute, I wanted to buy a newspaper to have shown in the German sequence where they throw the Paris, I think it's the Paris match, Liber posted out. And it was, you know, the one that I found was from August 1944. And it was just wonderful stuff like that. It was on eBay and it came and it was, you know, Paris is free, which these Germans would have looked at. They would have had a copy of that in you know, while they were in France. They would see that Paris had been liberated and they were, you know, excuse the expression, they were fucked at that point. It was a really bad thing. And we found that actual newspaper, an original one. That was the only one I could find. So
that's crazy.
Just wonderful things like that. And to use that in the picture was good. It was a little more degraded than it would have been 70, you know, plus years ago. The edges were a bit yellowed, but amazingly, it was actually quite good, you know, quite a good condition newspaper. So
that's awesome. That's incredible.
But yes, just, you know, you just got to be very careful, you know, each step of the way, and just question what's going on. As an AD, an assistant director, prior to being a stuntman, I was a PA and an assistant director. I did a lot of period pictures, and I was very aware of that. Everything from making sure there's not a styrofoam cup left in the back of the shot. I did Shawshank Redemption, which I think it spanned 3 decades in the end, or 4 decades even. And we were constantly fighting with bits of craft service being left in the background. Craft service is the little stand on set where they have snacks and coffees, and people would have a snack and they'd accidentally leave their styrofoam box or their coffee cup, and you're pulling
like the Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones.
Exactly. So you're right. You know, that's the very basic part of watching, all the way through to the research while you're writing. A turn of phrase. You know, for example, in this one we use the F word. I've used it now, so but we use the F word. We use the mother F word, and before I put that in the script, I went onto the computer. I went into finding out when the first use of that word was, and you got 1920s first recorded use of motherfucker. You know, and I apologize again.
No, just
my friend, but this was extraordinarily important to me. One of my historical guys, actually, he was the uniform guy, Hugh Daly, who's a very good guy. I've worked with a few times. He does, you know, he's the guy that checks the uniforms, and he sent back the script saying they wouldn't have said motherfucker in 1940. That's just simply not. And so I sent back the information saying yes, they would have done, because in America that was a term that was being used, you know, by jazz musicians. We've got it actually recorded, you know, and it would have been something they said. The F word was used enormously by American GIs. The movies we watch now, they don't, because of course in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they were heavily censored, and there was a, you know, you you didn't have that in movies, period. So you wouldn't have had it in a war movie. But this was a term that was very much used. It was, and so there was a lot of that, even to the, to the swear words and the cuss words. And I didn't want them. I wanted them to sound like real guys would have sounded then. Obviously, to the untrained ear, it sounds anachronistic hearing it, but it's like, no, I guarantee you, I've done the research for every single word that was used in this. And so that was fun to do. That was exciting, to spend 3 or 4 days looking up swear words.
It's obviously like every aspect of this film seems like a labor of love for you. And as much as I'd love to keep asking you questions, I'm about to be interviewing Daniel here in a minute.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel is awesome. He was a brilliant find. I'll quickly say that I was introduced to him. Everyone in this movie is people I've worked with before, except for Daniel. And I was introduced to him by a mutual friend, James Coyne, who's an incredible writer, who said, you have to meet this guy. And when I met him, I saw why he said that. After about 3 hours of talking to him, I realized this is someone I really want to work with. Not only that, but he speaks 3 languages, which the character in this film had to speak: French, German, and English. But he's one of the most incredible actors, human beings, physical performers out there. I'm sure you know he's probably the top fight choreographer in the world at the moment.
I was looking at that stuff, yeah.
Which he'll downplay on this one because he's just just an actor. He's primarily an actor in this one. But he's a force of nature, and his contribution to this film can't be overstated. It was brilliant. Nina is obviously playing Maria is the heart and beating soul of the film, but the supporting characters, I think it was Hitchcock who said, without a good bad guy, you don't have a good movie, and he is brilliant. So all right.
So before I wrap, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the movie? Any websites that you want readers and listeners to
I would say
social media?
That's an easy answer. Go see this movie if you can on the big screen. We're lucky enough to have a limited theatrical release at select theaters from November the 5th. It'll probably only be a week or so. If you have a chance to see the film, it was shot in old school anamorphic, which is a process which just has to be seen on the big screen. It was designed to be seen on the big screen. It was framed, shot, lit, and blocked to be on the big screen, with things going on each side of the frame. And we shot it very much as a homage to the films from the 60s and 50s, the big World War II movies, the colors, the palette, everything that's being used. So do yourself a favor, do yourself a treat, sit on the big screen if you can. If not, on a big screen TV, and enjoy it, because we all put our heart and soul into this one. I'm very proud of it.
Awesome.